Well, oh, here's going to a fun one. Looking at the concept of game randomization and using the prototype version of Pokemon Red and Green as an example of a hurdle, which is ultimately why they actually didn't do it. Now, a large part of this is going to be speculation because, quite frankly, the original source that I'm using for a lot of this is actually just a one-liner from a single interview. We don't have any detailed information, so all of the stuff other than the actual interview is speculation, and the interview is just, well, I'll get to that. The Dev interview revealed that while they had released two versions, Red and Green, they at one point were considering the idea of making every cartridge unique. We don't actually know what they meant by this, but given the differences between Red and Green, well, we have a few ideas. At any rate, this was deemed to be too difficult, and they only made Red and Green for the original versions. They later on made Blue and Yellow using similar logic to Red and Green, although Yellow has its own special sauce added to it that makes it a slight kind of weird, honestly. But looking at the way that the encounter tables are set up in Gen 1, there's a lot of quirks where the way that the encounter tables are set up seems to make it easy to just change stuff. And here is a form of randomization that it's not the only one that they've done, but it is an actual form of randomization that they did where they took your trainer ID number and used it in a way to randomize an aspect of the game. And, this is just one of those things where it's a asynchronous PvP battle where you fight the team of a friend or someone that you did the record mixing thing with, and you get to fight their team that's actually their team, but controlled by an NPC AI, and their ID number determines what NPC character art is used to represent that team. It's a very, very simple thing. Barely noticeable, honestly. But, it's an example. Since this is keyed solely on your trainer ID number and you can't change it. The game does not let you choose which model you want to use. It gives you one. Anyways, so here are the version exclusive Pokemon for the 4 Gen 1 games. Now, a lot of the things that are missing from Yellow are missing from Yellow for reasons that are very, very unique to Yellow. So, while it exists, it's not really relevant in the same way that Red and Green are. And Blue is just made to kind of sort of make a third game that doesn't really give you all of the good stuff. You still need Red and Green to complete the Pokedex. So Blue wasn't actually as awesome as people were hoping it would be, and that's the reason why it didn't get released in the US. For whatever reason, they made Red and Blue in the US, but used the data from Red and Green. Okay, there actually was one thing with Blue. Blue had updated art and stuff like that, and certain things that were bugs were fixed. And that stuff got brought into the English version. That they didn't actually ever release the actual setup used in Blue. So here's an example of an encounter table to be used just as a quick demonstration of just how modular it is. Now, instead of doing like a dice roll, like rolling a d20, because this is a 8-bit Game Boy, they're using a 1 in 256 chance for things. So it rolls a 256 number and uses that as its odds. Now, 51 out of 256 is approximately 20%, and so on and so forth. Now, the interesting thing with this is that the way this table is set up, a lot of things have multiple entries. Like you have Magneton, you have a level 32 one and a level 35 one. You will never find a level 33 or a level 34 because encounter table entries for those don't exist. And this modularity, though, it means that you can easily swap out one or two things. Like, and then here, the red version of this has Electabuzz as the 4% and 1% spawns, which, different level. But the blue one replaces those with Raichu. And when I say blue, I mean this is like the same encounter table used in the American blue. Although the Japanese blue didn't have Electabuzz either, so I believe it also had Raichu. Anyways, now here I have the odds total up. It's like 30% chance of Voltorb, 30% chance of Magnemite, 25% chance of Pikachu, unless you're playing yellow, in which case I think they got replaced with Grimer. 10% chance of Magneton, and 5% chance of Electabuzz. Unless you're playing green/blue, in which case you have Raichus, which good to catch for Pokedex completion purposes, but given that there is literally only two things in the entire game that can evolve with Thunderstones, and the fact that you can buy Thunderstones, yeah, saving the Thunderstone really isn't worth a whole lot. I would rather have the Electabuzz. Also, Raichu isn't good. So, anyways, moving on. So, the Gen 3 thing uses the last digit of the player's ID number. This is just a decimal digit. But the actual ID number used in the Gen 1 games is a 16-bit binary value, which is displayed as a 5-digit decimal value, but the actual in-game coding is binary, which could be used as a series of 16 yes or no flags. The version of list exclusive Pokemon on the previous slide has 16 Pokemon on it, but for reasons I'll get into, for balancing, if it's just like yes or no, would be an absolute nightmare, because if it's a simple yes or no thing, then having it like turn on Magmar or turn off Magmar and nothing else is a balancing nightmare, because someone somewhere will get a cartridge that has none of them, and some people will get a cartridge which has over half. For a balancing perspective, that's a problem, and I suspect that that's a large part of the reason why they decided not to do this, and that they're paring the idea down and condensing it resulted in them just making two versions and deciding that they didn't want to go through the hassle of having more than two versions. But yeah, it's like the way that it works with the red-green difference is that you either have Electabuzz or you have Magmar, and it's a binary flag, but when one thing is turned off, a different thing is turned on. It's not a matter of just turning everything off. So here's the list of binary flags. Ekans/Arbok or Sandshrew/Sandslash, Vulpix or Growlithe, Oddish or Bellsprout, Meowth or Mankey, Scyther or Pinsir, Electabuzz or Magmar. Now, going through this list, quite frankly, a lot of these are things that are seen as not as good. Like, Vulpix is generally seen as not as good as Growlithe, mainly because of the fact that it has stats that are much lower. I'll get to that later. Ekans, Arbok, Psychic types made poison types kind of rubbish in Gen 1. Sandshrew, less of an issue, but it had bad stats, so no one cared about it either. Honestly, Arbok didn't have good stats either. Oddish turning into Vileplume, other than the fact that it was a poison type, it was actually got seen as one of the best grass types. Not the best, but, better than most of the other grass types in the game. Meowth. Okay, Meowth is one of those where the logic with it is solely based on the fact that it has the ability to use Payday. Payday giving you free money means that Meowths have value. Although, if I remember correctly, Payday was a TM in Gen 1, so you could, in fact, get Payday, although only one copy of it, in Red, despite the fact that Meowth being version exclusive to Green. Or you could just trade to get one from Green, but you have to find someone who has Green. Mankey was not one of the better fighting... Okay, Primate... Yeah, I don't feel like getting into the details on the fighting Pokemon stats, but fighting Pokemon were, for the same reason I think about poison types, not seen as particularly good. So being a pure type fighting, you need something more than just monkey throws rock. Scyther and Pinsir. Neither of them was particularly good because they had bad move pools in Gen 1. Later editions made them better by giving them move pools that didn't suck. But, Scyther and Pinsir have always been seen as approximately equal, and neither is actually all that good. Electabuzz and Magmar. I'll get into the Magmar thing in a little bit, but Gen 1 had very, very few electric types. You have Raichu, you have Electabuzz, you have Jolteon, and that's about it other than Zapdos. So, okay, technically you also have Magneton and the one that looks like a Pokeball. You also have those. They don't have good stats, so people didn't use them a whole lot. But they did exist. Honestly, of Magneton and Voltorb, I would actually say that Voltorb is better, mostly because of the fact that it's really fast, and Magneton is not. Anyways, moving on. Which gets into what I was saying about the whole balance issues thing. The majority of fire types were actually tied into something special, either being a version exclusive or being something that you just can't find in the wild. The only one that's not a version exclusive that is able to be found in the wild is Rapidash. Moltres, one-off legendary. Charizard is a starter Pokemon, which you may or may not get. And then Flareon, well, you have to choose between Flareon and Jolteon. Or Vaporeon. Vaporeon was obviously the one people chose least because of the fact that there's actually quite a lot of good water types in Gen 1, and Vaporeon was not actually seen as being necessary, although, people liked having it, because it had good stats. But it was easily replaceable. Anyway, Jolteon was just one of the best. So, Anyway, so the stats with the fire types. Charizard 510, Ninetales 524, Arcanine is 535, although the distribution of the stat points on Arcanine was seen as better than Ninetales. Rapidash is only 500, Magmar is 480, and Flareon was 540. Flareon legitimately had one of the highest physical attack stats in the game. As a fire type, its stab moves don't run off of that stat, but having double kick as a fire type is actually quite good because you can double kick rock types. Anyway, so the version exclusives for green were not something that people would consider a reason to have it instead of red unless they wanted it for completion purposes. I mean, does Magmar suck? No. Is it better than Arcanine? No. So, yeah. And that gets into the whole thing with this, is that this is the curated, pared down version. Imagine a game where you don't have Ninetales, Arcanine, or Magmar. You don't have any of them. So then your only options are the starter Pokemon, Rapidash, or Flareon. And those are the only fire types in the game. I suspect this is a large part of the reason why the devs decided not to go with the whole like random chaos way of doing Pokemon availability. Realistically, making it balanced, they needed to have everything as binary toggles where you get A or B. Granted, it's still not ideal because of the fact that people are not going to see A and B as equally valuable. Like I said, it's Ninetales or Arcanine, but people generally saw Arcanine as being better than Ninetales, so they would rather have Arcanine than Ninetales. Anyway, now there is also the fact that it's not as simple as just the exclusivity that is usable for randomization. See, one thing that's a notable feature of red and green is that in red, Nidoran female is rare and Nidoran male is common, and vice versa in green, which means that you can find them, it's just more time consuming. Honestly, some people probably didn't notice. I actually didn't notice personally. I didn't find out until I looked it up in a book. But, it's the sort of thing that you could have in the toggles. Like the power plant example. It has 30% chance of Voltorb and 30% chance of Magnemite. You could, if you wanted to do a non-exclusivity toggle, have it so that Voltorb is a 40% chance and Magnemite is a 20% chance. Or maybe 50-10 or something like that. It would give you a, serious difference between versions. And if you wanted to get really crazy for it, you could have it spawn wild electrodes instead of Magneton, because that's actually a thing, is that you don't actually have the ability to just run into wild electrodes. Wild Voltorbs, sure, no problem. Wild electrodes, static placed encounters only. But a version that has mostly Voltorbs and only a few Magnemites, you could swap it so that all of the things that would be Magnetons would be replaced with Voltorbs. Or anyways, that's a thing though, is that while they could have done this, they didn't. Probably for balancing reasons, because the fact that when you look at the game, there's actually not a huge number of things where you can just swap A for B and it's, seen as approximately equivalent, even if it's, one of them is better than the other, because quite frankly, I would not consider Magneton to be the better Pokemon. I would have, in red and green at least, I would consider Voltorb / Electrode to be the better Pokemon. In red and green, anyways. Later editions, that changed, but because the fact that they gave Magneton a third form, not because of the fact that Magneton actually became better. Anyways, another thing that did not happen in red and green, but maybe possibly they could have if they'd thought of it, was to have things be a binary choice between a static encounter versus a random encounter. Yeah. See, some of the beta versions of Red and Green had the various legendary Pokemon, which would be the Three Birds and Mewtwo. All of them were in some map in the game a randomly encountered Pokemon. And whether or not this would have been something that was set up to be a one-off encounter or a thing you could catch multiples of isn't entirely certain because it was an unfinished prototype build and there's several bits we just don't know. However, a random flag that changes it from a one-off to a non-one-off Pokemon is actually a pretty major difference. And having that just tied to your trainer ID number when you start the game, yeah, I can see why people would consider that to be a balancing nightmare. It is the sort of thing that people like to do for challenge runs in playing emulators, but I can see why people would consider that to be a good feature for the actual um, official release. Also, this would actually have the trainer ID number be baked into the cart and not randomly generated when you create a save file. Well, actually, in this, the ID number would actually be the ID number of the cart, not the ID number of the player character. So, certain carts would be considered less valuable because they had less good stuff in them. Which, again, balancing nightmare. Other things you could randomize. Well, we had trades in Red and Green, some of which were kind of weird, and it's like, why did they bother putting this in as a trade other than to give people a reason to pay attention to the fact that the concept of trading exists? Well, okay, encouraging players to, trade with other players is certainly a thing. But with the exception of the Nidoran trades, it didn't actually have version exclusive trades, but the Nidoran trades were version exclusive trades. So you trade a Nidoran female for a Nidoran male, or a Nidoran male for a Nidoran female. Which trade happens depends on whether it's red or green. Now, this gets into another thing that was from prototypes. Some of the concept art shows what appears to be a Pokemon and having merchandise where they're apparently selling Pokemon. Now, having certain Pokemon be available for sale and having that as a randomized feature, it could happen. Do I have any reason to believe that they actually did work on making a prototype that was like that? No, not really. But here, we're speculating. So, as a speculation aspect, that is a thing that seems like it could be a possibility. I mean, you could also just have the actual stuff Pokemart sell be randomized. Like this one doesn't sell Poison Heal. But that would just be inshitifying the loot tables that you get from the Poke Centers. Unless you're going to have in this one cart, Pallet Town has Ultra Balls, and the rest of them don't. Well, people would like that as a balancing thing. So, yeah, again, it goes with the whole thing of going full nonsense is a balancing nightmare, especially if it's baked into the individual carts and not something that's randomized where you start a save file and it changes things at random. This does kind of fit with the whole thing of some things are available in the wild and some things aren't, because Red and Green did have 4 Pokemon that you can only get via trades and the one that you get in each game is the same, but one of the things that could, in theory, have been randomized is whether something is only available via trade and thus a one-off, or if it's something you can encounter in the wild. Like Farfetch'd. Some Gen 1 games actually have Farfetch'd as a wild encounter in Cycling Road, actually. But the original Red and Green only had Farfetch'd as a one-off trade. The idea being that it's not actually a Kanto Pokemon, or it's something that's so rare that it's been hunted to almost to extinction. And thus, the one that you're trading to get is one of a rare handful that are still left. Or if you go with the Team Rocket is being evil thing, you could just say that the random missing Pokemon are things that Team Rocket got rid of for some reason. Anyways, non-Pokemon things. In theory, some of the item-related things could have been randomized. The idea of making like random TMs, like where it's like the TM actually has like a randomly assigned move in it, probably a bad idea. In theory, you could do it, but it seems like something that's just generally not a good idea. But having a set list of 50 TMs and randomly choosing from that list of TMs to spawn things in item balls, you could do that. Now, you probably wouldn't want to go full random because the 8 ones assigned to the gym leaders are unique TMs that only those gym leaders have, for the most part anyways. I think Psychic is an exception there. But other than that, yeah. And conclusions. It's easy to see why the devs saw this as a balancing nightmare and pared it down to just being a red versus green dichotomy. Like, red versus green. Green is seen as being generally less good than red. Even though that there's actually only a handful of things that are actually meaningful differences. When you choose A or B, there's only a handful of minor things to choose one way or the other, but it's actually not equal. So, you know. The Meowth with Payday thing is actually quite good, though. But if I remember correctly, you could still get the Payday with the TM, so you would still get free money. Yeah. Anyways, though, well, that will be all for this one. It was an interesting thing to ponder. Like, serious, I don't know what the heck the devs were thinking stuff. And I can guess why they decided not to go full random, because, again, balancing nightmare. Anyways, see you guys later.